don't you do that. Okay, cat's out of the bag then. Right. So yes. So other people, when they come and you know, and Granny comes in and she's been a faithful member of the church for years, and she says, my son and daughter are going to be in town and we'd like to get our newest grandchild baptized, and you'll go, oh yes, that would be great. Someone walks in we've never met before and they're saying, well, you know, we'd like to have our child baptized, and people say, oh, well, first of all, you have to join the church, and then you have to do this. We have sliding scales for people. And if you don't think you have, just kind of reflect on some of those things for yourself, okay? So we all want to be a bit more sheepy, and we all think we can tell the difference between sheep and goats. My experience was I was on holiday somewhere and I saw a little clay figure of a sheep, and I thought, oh, that's lovely, I'd like that. And I went up to the lady at the till and I said, I'd like this sheep, please, and she said, it's a goat. Okay, right. So the way to bring out your sheepiness is you have to squish down those goaty attributes, right? Those goaty attributes that say, it's all about me, it's about the people I know, I have a job, I'm reaching out to this group of people, I don't know what they're doing, but they're nothing to do with me. And we have to really focus on the whole of the community as all Christ's children together, which means that you have to be prepared to really speak out in situations that might be a little bit difficult, because being a sheep does not make you popular. Sheep are not the most popular animals in the world. I'll tell you that. Right. Rick! Oh, hang on. No. Nope.
Okay, just a second, I'll get to
Okay.
give him a knock there.
And sometimes it takes a lot of courage to speak out. I know that we've had a number of situations I'll reflect on about what we need to do, and it makes our voices shake sometimes to try and speak the truth. And so, but maybe all of you as alumni of Queen's have something to say. Maybe you've got something you need your local community to hear, something you need the church to hear. Maybe you're called to start a movement, more on that in a minute. Maybe you're called to challenge the usual way that life works. But what it really is, as you're encouraged, as you come out and as you have left Queen's, and over the years you've been involved in ministry, you've all been involved in ministry, lay or ordained, that you're actually starting to become who you were supposed to be. You're becoming more and more sheepy. I'll stop using the word sheepy now because sometimes it turns people off. So I don't want to be a sheep, I want to be a Labrador, I want to be a grizzly bear. Stop calling me a sheep. So instead I'll say that you're actually becoming more and more what your spiritual DNA is all about. Yes, there we go. Becoming who you were born to be in Christ. So you, all of you, will have had some kind of defining moment when you couldn't ignore that little voice in your head or in your prayer life that said, time to act, get on, do it. I know for me it came at a time when I had a private practice working with children with developmental delays and behavior difficulties. I was teaching part-time at the university. I had 4 children. I was doing the music ministry at church. I was really happy. I had a great life. It was really good. And in prayer one day, the answer I got from God was, so what? I thought, so what? So what? And it was finally, couldn't stop running away from the fact that I felt I had a calling to a vocation. So I listened to that this much, and I went and said, I felt I was called to be a vocational deacon because I felt I could give God this much, right? Give him this much, right? But I keep this much doing the other stuff, right? So I did that for a while, and God, in the way that only God can, has a wonderful sense of humor. And then 2 years later, I had been back to theological school, was now a priest, and working in a parish out the west of Edmonton. And my link to you guys is that Ed Lewis was my assessor at ACPO. So there you go. So if you don't like what you hear this morning, blame Ed. Okay, deal? Right. So, but we all have that moment, and sometimes I envy those people, and I know envy is a sin, but I envy those people who've had it early on in life, who've always known that they were loved by God and called into that incredible relationship with Him. I didn't have that. I was baptized when I was 25 years old with our youngest boy, eldest boy rather, but gradually over time I've come to believe that I am God's own child and called into a way of life or a way of being by Christ. And maybe you've had, well, I'm sure you've had that experience too. But with that understanding of who you are internally, there comes that understanding of what we're supposed to do externally with these and this and these and these. Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? What are you going to say? Who are you going to listen to? Because all of that together tells us who we're going to be. They used to say that St. Francis had a mantra that he would pray every day: who are you, God, and who am I? Who are you, God, and who am I? And I think that that's something that for us, as we go through life, we come to that understanding that each of us, God, is far more than we ever thought He was. And we are far more than we ever thought we were when we started this journey with God. And it's very, very authentic, and you can't miss it when you see it. I was at the Anglican Consultative Council in Lusaka last year, and I met a wonderful Zambian young woman, Catherine, and her vocation simply shone out of her. She'd been orphaned and then adopted by an auntie, and had lived a difficult life, but she was a faithful girl in the church and had grown up into this amazing young woman. And she said to me, I think God is calling me, but it will be too difficult to follow. And I said, but you must. And there were, I mean, poor girl, imagine it, there were bishops from all around the world. We were fighting over this girl because it was so clear that she was called and she was amazing and had something to share with the world. We were all trying to encourage her, and we were all thinking about, okay, so how could we get a visa for her and bring her to our place and all the rest of it? And she was saying, I just don't know who it is I'm called to be. And for the first time in my life, I was wearing a different, obviously, petrol cross, and I just took off my cross and I stuck it over her head, and I said, this is what you're called to be. And she was like, oh. And so she went to the community at St. Anselm. I have no idea what she did with the cross, but I hope to see her one day ordained in whatever capacity and way, because it was just so clear. And the whole room knew it. The whole room knew it. Maybe you've had an experience like that. You must have, with those of you who've taught at Queen's, seen people come through, maybe because they had an interest in theology but weren't sure what that was going to lead to. And you must have looked at them and said, oh my goodness, you're called to go into a community and to change it. You know, and part of our role, and part of your role still as alumni, is to keep doing that, to keep helping people find the way they're called to be changed. And to understand that inside everybody, there's more and more Jesus that wants to get out and change the world. But to do that, you've got to believe something very particular and sometimes a little difficult about every other single person. Rowan Williams, who I have to admit is my favorite person, said, what difference would it make if I believed that I am held in a holy, loving gaze, which saw all my surface accidents and arrangements, all my inner habits and inheritances, all my anxieties and arrogances, all my history, and yet loved me wholly with an utterly free, utterly selfless love? And what difference would it make if I let myself believe that each person around me is loved and held in the same overwhelming, loving gaze, and that this love makes no distinctions of race, religion, age, innocence, strength, or beauty? If we could feel like that, that would be our spiritual DNA coming out. Because don't you want to believe it for yourself? I do believe it for myself, because I know when I read this and I think of all my surface accidents and arrangements, I have lots of surface accidents, not least the fact that I'm round when I don't think I should be round. All my inner habits, doubt myself, to wonder if I'm good enough. Have you ever wondered if you're good enough? Yeah. All my anxieties, I have anxieties. All my arrogances, I can really be arrogant. I know best. You of course never have those thoughts, do you? All my history, I have some mucky bits in my history. I do. And yet loved me wholly with an utterly free and selfless love. Because that's the joy I found in God. That I believe that's how I'm loved. And the call for God, for me, is to look out at those around me and to love them like that. It's a big call, isn't it? But if you can do it, or if you can even start moving into doing it more, we're living out that spiritual DNA, and then the idea of living into that passage from Matthew becomes a way of life. Barbara Brown Taylor said at that passage in Matthew, I showed you at the beginning, she said, oh, Matthew gives me a pain. Have you read her books? Oh, she says, Matthew gives me a pain. I read this passage and I think, okay, right, today, I have to find one imprisoned person, one sick person, and then I have to do the same again tomorrow. And of course, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that you have to have that attitude to life, that that's what we're about. We're about the world and those people who become, we're about us and not about me. That's what we move towards. And so it starts with us. I have the sticker on my mirror at home. Objects in the mirror are closer to Jesus than they appear, right? Because I have to remind myself of that every single day. I'm much closer to Jesus than I think I am, right? As Karl Barth used to say, God has chosen us all in Christ. And at our deepest level, we're all called Jesus in the eyes of the Father. We're all called Jesus in the eyes of the Father. So knowing God, being known by God, makes a difference in the whole of our life. And once you've caught a glimpse of him, and a glimpse of him in someone else, you can't help looking for him everywhere. And the impact of God in Christ in our lives means that our whole lives are turned upside down and differently. My life, since I came to know God and I suppose breathe deeply in the Spirit, has literally turned upside down. So I would encourage you to live that little bit of the gospel that you think is enough. What is your Bible passage that you live by? Is it Luke 4, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me? Is it Matthew 25? Is it something else? Do you have something that resonates so strongly within you that if somebody said, what are you going to do this morning when you get up? It would be based in that piece of scripture. And if you know what it is, stick it on your mirror every morning when you look at yourself. Maybe after you put your glasses on if you need to. But put it on your mirror so every morning. That is what I am about. That is what I am about. So what does it look like when you live like that? In the Diocese of Edmonton, we're trying to use a model based on Luke 7, 8, 9 and 10, which functions as a rule of life for us as individuals, for us as parishes, as a diocese, and enables us to think about how we go out into the world more. And I have copies of it. You're welcome to it. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today, but it basically is engaging with people, nurturing people, encountering people, and encountering God, and then growing in God. So moving through that model every single day of our lives. And that means with engaging with people who might call themselves unchurched or de-churched, nurturing people into relationships first, and then hopefully into faith, but nurturing people into relationship. And encountering, talking to people. Notice I said talking to people, not at people. I'm talking at you a little bit now, but I hope I'm going to be talking with you later on. But sometimes the church has done a great job of kind of holding itself at a distance and shouting over the wall at people, you should be living like this, as opposed to getting down and dirty and going and kind of talking with people about what's their lives actually, what's actually happening. And then growing. growing more and more like Jesus, living into your model. So asking yourself how we engage with our neighbours. Do we expect our neighbours to come to us? Are we bothering to go to them? What kind of things are we doing to help meet people, intentionally go out and meet people? I tell you, I threatened to lock all the clergy out of their offices 2 days a week. I did, because some of them had got to the point where they were too scared to go out. And I say that quite seriously, because the idea of going and engaging with people who maybe didn't have a particular thought, a good thought about the church, was not good. But for those of you who have read any of the mission-shaped church materials, there's a couple of great ones, Mission-Shaped Parish and Mission-Shaped Spirituality. Yes, they're out of the Church of England, and yes, I was English, but they're still good. And but it talks about the freedom in going out. And there's one particular priest who talks about when she didn't know what she was supposed to do, so she took her day timer and just started writing across 2 days a week, go. And she put great lines through the day so she couldn't make appointments. And it just simply said go. And she talks about the first time she went, she was terrified because she took her bag, she locked her office door behind her and she went out and she had no idea where she was supposed to go. And she said those days became the best days of her weeks because she would sit down on park benches or on the pavement next to people who seemed to be having a hard time and just talk about what was going on in their lives. And she learned so much more in her 2 days out in the community without an agenda than she did in all the time she'd been in the parish. And so let's talk about what that might look like in going out. So I'll show you some examples and talk a little bit about them, and then maybe we can share some examples about how we all might be engaged in that kind of thing. So I might need Rick to help me because I think I'm about to kill this if I touch it. Vic, could you give me a hand? I need to switch to a different file.
You just want to switch to another slide?
It's in a different...
Another PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay. There's that down here.
Three. Second one's
This one?
it. Yeah. There you go.
Okay. I assure you this is the most intense performance appraisal any provost ever had to undergo. 7 billion people have access to this online.
What? Oh, right. Now, I work with very tall people. I want you to know that. It's not that I'm short. I'm telling you that, right? Okay, it's bad. It's bad, right? Yes, bad. Short and round, what can I say? The very tall person there, did I mention he's very tall? Right. In the middle is our dean, Neil Gordon, and he was a curate of Ed Lewis. So if you don't like this bit, blame Ed. All right, here we go. Right. So part of going out for us, what does it look like? We, like many churches, went out and decided to do Ashes to Go. So we go out into the community on Ash Wednesday, and anyone who wants to come to us, we go to bus stations, and we have a light rail transit system, and we go to those stations, and we're not allowed to go and kind of attack people and give them ashes. We just have to stand there, and people come to us if they want to. And we went out because we wanted to listen to what was going on in the community. So the first thing we had to listen to was people in our own community. And can you guess what they said? Cheap grace. Cheap grace. You're just going out and giving them to people? I'm thinking, well, we don't usually charge. I mean, so we stood in places and we had our ashes, and people came up to us. And all it was a quick prayer and a signing with ashes, and on they went on their day. And what we heard from people ranged from, oh my goodness, is it Lent? And then the person next to them saying, what's Lent? And this person who hadn't thought about it for I don't know how many years suddenly going, Lent is a time of year when you remember blah, 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 and off they went. And so off you went, and you saw them carrying on this conversation. Goodness knows where it would go, but the conversation was open. Other people came up and said, I can't take ashes. I've been away from church for so long, it would be hypocritical. And we said, would you like to receive ashes today? Yes, I would. And we would pray, and the prayers were always for, my life is so messed up right now, and I wish it could be different. And we prayed with people about putting things into the hands of Christ. We prayed with people who were on their way to the courthouse. I remember one woman saying, I'm on my way to try and get my kids back today. I've got my life together, I've stopped drinking, and would you pray for me as the day goes on? So, anyone wants to tell you it's cheap grace, oh no. But we went out, and that struck people as being amazing. They said, you came out of the church. It's like, uh-oh. You came out of the church. One person said, I didn't realize you guys were still around. Well, that's interesting to hear, isn't it? And other people, for many people, it was, oh, sister, it's so good to see you this morning. So that was fine too. But it was the idea that we saw something, a stirring of the heart, perhaps, a leaping of the soul. And the people who were most changed by it were us. Goodness knows what happened. We saw hundreds of people. I kid you not, hundreds and hundreds of people, including people from other faiths who came up and said, is this your holy time? We will remember you in our prayers. That's how we're supposed to be, right? And so, and people said, could I still come back? Like if I decided it was okay to, I mean, would the church take me back? Can you imagine asking a question like that? And we said, Jesus has never left you. You've been in Jesus' heart your whole life. And if you want to come and celebrate that in the church, we would love to see you. But never forget, Jesus is holding you tight right now. We said to people, Jesus is going into that courtroom with you. Jesus is going into that job interview with you. Jesus is going with you as you go home from the night shift. And it was just wonderful. Do I think that we met lots of goats? No. I think we met lots of sheep. Lots of sheep going out into the world and finding a little bit of a remembrance. So for all of us, we're called to listen for God's mission, listen to our Christian tradition, absolutely, but listen to the local context. Where are you? And ask God and pray, what are you doing? How do you want us to join in? Because as we heard in the sermon last night, it would be impossible to believe that God had just stopped doing anything. Could you believe that? Even if you thought that, maybe the church that you're in is kind of having trouble growing and working out its way and its life in the community right now, but it would be impossible to believe that God wasn't out there in the community doing something. It's not like, are we entering into kind of a terrible time of way back in the prophets, where in early Old Testament times that the biggest worry people had was that God had gone to sleep. God was asleep and he'd forgotten them. I mean, if we're not careful, the way we talk about the church could lead people to believe, are we entering the second great silence? Of course we're not. God is just saying, well, if I can't work through you, I'll work around you. So it's an exciting time. In this living into who we're called to be, you are going to encounter, if you haven't already, some opposition. Let me tell you a little bit about opposition. This is one of our churches, and you can see it's got sprayed on it, no homeless, in great big black letters all over it. We were going to build an affordable housing complex in the grounds of this church. We have 4 acres of ground, so it wasn't as if we were squishing it all in. And the local community got very, very upset. They spray painted the church. They came and said to our priest, we know where you live. Can you imagine? We know where you live. We can follow you home. They had thousands of people come to a meeting that said, we don't want people like that living here. We had people speak at the meeting who said, well, I'm from here, and I'm from here because my life got to be put back together by this, but by being able to kind of have a home. And very good, godly people who went to church, Roman Catholic, Anglican, United, from the local community, all came and said, we don't want your sort here. I'm not kidding. It was appalling. It was just dreadful. And it was kind of, we saw people who I guess thought they were wonderful sheep telling the goats to go away, but I think it might possibly. But it was just crazy. It was crazy. And so it was, there will be opposition, but we're still here. And we're going back this summer with a new proposal for them. So, you know, people have to be careful what they say. They say, of course, if you were building something with, you know, Habitat for Humanity, we'd be there pounding in nails alongside you. We thought. So we're putting in an affordable seniors complex for people who've come off the streets, and also working on some work with Habitat for Humanity. So that would be great. And we're going to invite the people who were very opposed to us to come and pound nails next to us. And we'll remind them, because we have the tape, of them saying that they couldn't wait to do that. So, hey, I'll let you know how it goes. The next thing that happened is that in Edmonton we have a very young, he's 38 years old, very secular. He would be one of those people who say, I'm spiritual but not religious. You've all met those people. Mayor. And Edmonton is a city of 1 million people, give or take. And he came and he said, there's too much poverty in this city. I think we should eliminate it. Would you co-chair a task force? And I had two responses. The first response was, are you sure you want me on that because I represent the church, and are you sure you want this because that's not always a helpful thing? No, absolutely, I want you on that, right? And the second one, which I didn't tell him, was a feeling of terrible shame. Because here he was, this very secular, very lovely young man, had a bit of a mum crush on him. So this lovely young man who said, you know, who was telling us, the church, about the people who needed clothing or food or a drink, and who was telling me Matthew 25. I was interviewed by the local TV station and I went along, and he said, oh, what do you think about Matthew 25 then, Bishop? And I was so shocked. I was so shocked that someone from a secular place was going to talk to me about Matthew 25 on breakfast television. And he said, would you like me to remind you of the words? And I'm like, no, I didn't expect you to say it. But I was so shocked that, and it's what was happening was that God has been busy. God has been busy, and he's raising up people to say, this is not what the world is supposed to be like. All of us, we prayed it this morning, pray the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, right? Well, I mean, how do we think that's going to happen? By us sitting on our hands? I don't think so. We're supposed to be helping make that kingdom come here on earth. And so we had to then suddenly get it together. So I went out, and I've been working in this area for a while. And one of the things is, if you go out, you meet whole different groups of people that you might not otherwise meet. So we have this bold vision. Poverty in Edmonton ends within a generation. So can you guess the first thing that people said to us? Yeah, that's right. You're so naive. It's never going to happen. Poverty will always be with us. Doesn't it say that in the Bible? And those kinds of things. And I was quite surprised, because I wasn't sure the people who were talking to me about that actually read the Bible all that much. So, but shame on me, because I was thinking they were goats. There I went again, right? I was having a goatee moment, right? But so we had to decide, okay, so what do we actually believe? And so just think about that for a moment. What if you had to say what you actually believed about your community? You actually had to write that down on paper. That was a challenging task for me. I had to say, I believe that no person living in Edmonton is irrevocably broken. I believe people who work hard should be able to provide for their families and contribute positively to society. I believe that situations can change and that with the right supports and education and opportunities, everyone can succeed and make society better. I also believe that once you know the causes of poverty and you don't do anything about it, then as a human being, you are diminished. If you know the causes and you choose to do nothing, then I think as a human being, you are diminished. And that we need to speak about our common humanity, and that I need to remember that Jesus calls us, and as Karl Barth said, we are all called Jesus in the eyes of the Father. The minute I started to think like that, I was off like the Duracell bunny, let me tell you, right? I am not a terribly brave person, and I used to be a very quiet person, don't you laugh, Percy Coffin. But I have been sent out to all these places I never thought I would go. It may be different here, but in Edmonton it's an incredibly secular city, and the church isn't invited out that much. We're wallflowers at kind of local parties, right? We don't get invited to dance that much. But with this, all of a sudden, the church was invited out. We were invited to speak to the Teachers Association, to the government, provincial, federal, and municipal. We were invited into the University Senate. We were invited to speak to trade unions. We were invited to speak to housing folks. We were invited right out into the community, and people expected us to bring a faith lens. They expected it. They were disappointed. I remember the people at the city going, you know, Jane, you don't wear your collar when you go out every time. It'd be much better if you always wore your collar. Seriously? Okay. Because it was the idea of kind of, this is a very deep issue and we need to bring every bit of who we are as human beings to bear on it. We also formed incredible links with our First Nations people, incredible links. And part of that was to think about what the First Nations people in Edmonton think about poverty. In Edmonton, we're on Treaty 6 land, and the level of poverty in Edmonton, I told you there are about 1 million people, about 118,000 people in Edmonton live in poverty. That's 1 in 5 children. If you happen to be First Nations, it's 1 in 2. 1 in 2. So we made sure that we listened to people we don't necessarily always listen to. If you wanted to know something about something, you go and ask an expert. But when it comes to things like social change and poverty, we don't necessarily always go and ask the people who are living in poverty. So we made sure that we went and asked the experts. That is the Cree word for poor. And I used to say it out loud, and then I've been told by different Cree people that I pronounce it so terribly, will I just show it to people? Because depending if you're Plains Cree or Stony Cree, there's a different way to pronounce it, so I just put it up there. But it loosely means a person in need, someone who is poor, and it's not necessarily money. So it could be somebody who's poor in spirit, someone who's given up on life, someone who's having terrific mental health difficulties right now. So we had to understand that poverty is complex and systemic and deeply rooted, and if we want to find a solution, we have to involve the whole community. Why are you talking to us about this so much, Jane, when we're speaking about the prophetic voice? Well, because for the church, you need to understand the community where you live, and in Edmonton, poverty is one of the biggest ills. Really is one of the biggest ills, 12% of people. And things needed to change. And so this is where we've kind of put our mark on things, right? Some things are incredibly easy to see. I saw the report that had come out here. Oh my goodness, well done you guys for the work in St. John's. It's brilliant. And many of the things you're doing here, we have a similar plan. But some things, people think that, you know, this is the stereotype of poverty. right? This is the stereotype. People who are living on the street or who are panhandling. And we have in Edmonton a beautiful river valley that runs through, and people make camps in the river valley and live under tarps and things all through the winter and through the summer too. So the winter, the coldest it gets is about -38. In the summer, the hottest it gets is about +38. So you can ask yourself if you'd like to be under a tarp in either of those extremes, right? And so people kind of thought, well, we're talking about these people. But we're quite surprised when we found that 70% of the people who are homeless are chronically homeless, like again and again and again. Half of them are Indigenous people, but some of them are veterans of either the military or the RCMP. Some of them are, 3/4 of them are men, 1/4 of them are women, and there are many families and many youth. And when we counted, as you probably found here, just this one aspect, we also know that there are people who are never included in these kinds of counts because they're couch surfing and kind of actually using up their friends a bit at a time to go and stay there. So the actual needs of the society is huge. So what role do we as Christians or as church have to make a difference? What role can we play? You've got to start by finding your own integrity. What is your integrity? So the place we started in diocese was to say, all right then, we are going to make sure that we are a living wage employer, if you want to put it that way. And all the clergy, of course, said, well, of course we're a living wage employer, because they all got paid living wages. And we said, well, what we'd like you to do is think that minimum wage in Alberta at the moment is $13.60. In October it will be 14, and then next October it will be 15, and it's been decided that that will be a living wage, the minimum wage. The living wage in Edmonton is $17.60. And usually the companies there, may happen here, instead of giving full-time employment, which would mean you'd have benefits, give lots of part-time jobs and part-time hours so you can't have benefits. And as soon as you reach a threshold, all your other supports disappear and you're worse than when you started. So the first thing was to bring some education around that and to the clergy to understand the kind of challenges that the people in the congregation had, because many of them had no idea. Seriously, no idea, because why would you? The second thing was saying that we as the diocese would be a living wage employer, and we said, so what about the people who are janitors? What about the people who are parish secretaries? Don't you be telling us that you pay them honorarium when you know that that's their job. Don't you be telling us that, oh, well, you know, we just pay an honorarium when you know that this person is holding down 3 janitorial jobs in order to kind of bring up their kids and pay their rent. Let's be thinking about that. So we did that. And then we said, we know that mental health issues in Edmonton are huge. So we're doing mental health emergency first aid training for all of the clergy and then all of the lay leaders in every parish. So that when people walk through the door, you have a better understanding of what's going on and you have a better understanding of what you can do. Well, is that church stuff, Jane? Is that church stuff? Oh, yes, it is. You just go back to Matthew 25. It's right there. How do you know if someone's sick? I'm just going to take a guess. You look pretty sick to me. Well, actually, I'm fine, thank you. How do you know if someone is in prison? Well, because they're locked up in an institution. What if they're imprisoned because of their mental health? What if they're imprisoned because of their poverty? How do you reach out to them and how will you help them? Jesus spent a lot of times on the front lines, right? The front line of ministry with the lost and the lonely and those that nobody else wanted to know anything about. And if we're all called Jesus in the eyes of the Father, where do you think we're supposed to be? So I'm getting a bit preachy now, so I'll get myself off that box and carry on. Okay, here we go. Dorothy Day, love Dorothy Day. She said, the greatest challenge of this day is how to bring a revolution of the heart, a revolution that has to start with each one of us. So wouldn't you just love it if every Christian person that you know thought of themselves as a revolutionary, that we actually had something to bring to the world to make a difference, and we weren't going to rest until we'd done it. It would just be fantastic. Wouldn't it be fantastic? The other thing is to be really thinking about what does it mean for children of God throughout Newfoundland, throughout Alberta, to be people of dignity. Do you remember the promise that we make at baptism? Will you respect the dignity of every human being? Well, what does that mean? What does that mean in the community where you live? Who is not being seen as having any dignity? Who is not being seen? Because we think for us in Edmonton that ending poverty is an issue of human rights and justice and equity. So we were challenged in this by the youth of the city. The youth of the city, and I have to tell you a funny story. There were a group from a local high school that came to do a poverty simulation for us of what it was like to be a young person who was in poverty, who had become a criminal by not having a bus ticket and getting a ticket for being on the bus without a ticket, and it was following them around, and they were gradually developing a criminal record. And they came to speak to us about that, and halfway through the presentation, this young girl, she goes, "You're my bishop. You confirmed me 2 weeks ago. What are you doing here?" I thought, well, isn't that great? You know, what are you doing here? You know, a bit like the ashes to go. You came out. Why are you out of your church? You bad bishop. Get back there at once. But the idea that we have young people in our churches who want to be part of that changing the world piece. They want to know that in the power of the gospel, that's what we're called to do. They don't want warm, you know, heated up leftover platitudes. They want real challenges to get out there and know they can make a difference. Also for us as Anglicans, see, I can't make PowerPoints clearly because the picture's in the wrong place. We'll just have a moment of sadness for that. Okay, we see the reduction or the removal, the elimination of poverty as a profound act of reconciliation. When the TRC finished its work, they talked about the different, the inequalities in the way that people were viewed. And there are 94 calls to action in the TRC report. Many of you know that. And so using that as a backdrop, we have been very intentional in Edmonton about putting those calls to action in our End Poverty Plan. But we've also been very intentional about taking the ones for the church into what we're doing as church. And I think even if you don't have a large Indigenous population, there are a lot of things in those calls to action that actually just speak about what we're called to be in relation to one another as human beings, as children of God. And so all of that I've told you, it's all about listening. You need to listen to where you are. We're told to listen to God. Well, we listen to God. But the other piece of that is to listen to the place and the people where we are found. And why listen? You don't want to fall into that trap of objectifying people. They need. I have a young clergy person who came back from a theological college, which I will not mention, but it was not Queen's. And he was very sad when he went into his parish that people wouldn't sign up to come to his Bible studies because he felt he was very, very good at Bible studies. And so I'm going to use the word punishment. The punishment for that, for the congregation, was he would give the Bible study as the sermon on Sundays. So you can imagine, it was not delightful. And I got many, many phone calls from the parish. And as a bishop, you know, you try and, you know, find out what's going on. But eventually there were just so many phone calls. And I remember going out and I said, "You preach, I'll preside." And I sat and listened, and it was like, oh my, oh my. Because don't you think most people want to know, yes, they want to go deeply into the scriptures, but they want to know, what am I going to do when I get up tomorrow morning? What am I going to do when I get up tomorrow morning? And if there's been a really hard gospel, and there are occasionally hard gospels, and sometimes we just leave it lying on the floor and think, oh, well, I won't deal with that. So we get up and, there's been this great big slap of the gospel just thrown on the floor. If you won't leave your family behind and follow me, then, I don't want you. That gospel, right? Wasn't that a really bad phrasing of it? But you know the one I mean, right? And we leave it slap on the floor there, and everyone's thinking, oh my, that was a bit much. This morning I think I'll preach on the epistle. It's like, whoa, excuse me, could you just tell me what that was all about, please? Because for a lot of people who come to our churches, they do not have scriptural heritage to know all of those pieces. So, we speak to people about kind of which are the bits that have just hit people between the eyes, and what are you going to do with it? You've got to do something. And that's about listening. And the objectifying people that this young man had fallen into was they need the Bible studies I can give them. Oh, well. First of all, you need to love them, and then you need to think about what do we need as a community to grow in Christ. Also, we listen so we can see where God is already incarnate in the community. What is God doing? In a few of our churches, people have God sightings at the end of the service. And at first, I wasn't sure what I thought about it, because it's the thing of kind of we were all ready to go, and we had the blessing, and it was just about to be the last hymn, and you're all fired up in the spirit, and it was would you all sit down? Sit down again. And then it was, where have people seen God this week? And I thought, oh, how is this going to be? But it was amazing. It was amazing. People said, well, you'll never guess what happened. This is what I saw, and this is where I was, and this is what happened. And I've been praying about this for ages. And all of a sudden, the whole community was all excited. So then when we were sent out, those conversations, you heard them suddenly come up at coffee. Like, tell me more about that. How am I hearing this? And so it's kind of, God is busy, and people are noticing. And we need to give people a chance to talk about that, because otherwise we become kind of like a secret society. Did you see God this week? Oh, yes, I did. That's great. Let's not talk about it, but that's good. Right. He's still out there then. Right, okay. But we need to be church with people and not necessarily for people. And I know that's I'm not explaining that as well as I could, but I think sometimes we do things to people all the time, thinking that, in a way that sometimes we think we're the sheepdog and they are the sheep, and they don't know what to do unless we're telling them, as opposed to what is God saying to this whole community, right? And then if you do that, and if you're used to kind of thinking about that, and then our spiritual DNA starts to get enriched, and then we start to ask even deeper questions. So we ask ourselves, well, I tried to do a fancy thing and it's not working, is it? Oh, there. Are there some needs in the community that can be met by offering some kind of loving service? In our diocese, we have a wonderful woman called Arlette Zink, and Arlette worked with Omar Khadr when he was in Guantanamo Bay. She used to go out and teach him, right? And then when she was working in the prison in Edmonton, she became aware of all the people there, and this is the maximum security prison, who were really trying to find ways of turning their life around. And so she's from the King's University, and they have started the Ephesus Project. And the Ephesus Project is a library without walls. So they take themselves into the prison to teach. They go in to teach. And these are regular people. They are not people who are specially trained for prison chaplaincy. They're regular people who go in and teach. And so they found a need that could be met by offering loving service. Another parish found that there were lots of very lonely people. A lot of people had moved from farms into this town and were feeling very isolated. So they just started having lunch on Tuesdays. They'd cook a lunch, and if you wanted lunch, come and eat it. They have about 150 people come and eat lunch every Tuesday now, because there was a need that could be met by loving service. When you've been listening and talking to one another, you can understand more the hardships and difficulties and joys and pleasures in people's lives. And you can help people stand on, I was going to say stand on the shoulders of their strengths, but then I was thinking of the squishy things there. But you know your people better. You know your people better. And then it does become a community of loving relationships. You learn what people most value in their lives. You learn how people relate to God. I remember one little old lady who came one Good Friday. I used to keep the church open for people to come and make confessions all day between the services. And she came and she said, I haven't taken communion for the last 20 years. And I said, I noticed that. I noticed that. Do you want to talk about that? And she said, I haven't seen it the last 20 years. She said, I said something really awful to my sister when I was 60, and she's now 80. And until I'm really sorry for that, I can't take communion. And so she sat and she made a confession and she put it down. Right. And then she got up and I said, now, you're taking it with you again, aren't you? And she said, no. And I said, you're going to take communion on Easter Sunday? And she said, oh, I don't know, because I said that thing to my sister and blah, blah. And I said, oh, did nobody tell you the secret thing about confession? And she said, well, what's that? I said, at the foot of the cross, there's a huge vacuum tube. And when you put it down in confession, it's gone. Sorry, you can't have it back again. And she was like, oh, okay then. Oh, so I'll take communion on Sunday. That would be great, right? But, I mean, we could only joke about it and we could only talk about it because we had a relationship where she could finally come and say, I said this thing and it was awful. And yeah, it was awful. But she'd been carrying it around and she needed to put it down. And you can only put things down if you're in a relationship, right? And the other thing, oh yes, how do you get to know new people? How do you, and that's a difficult one in churches, how do you move out and get to know new people? I was in our sister diocese in Burundi and I was speaking to the clergy there about how we were getting ready for Invitation Sunday and the training we were doing and the encouragement we were giving to people. And the clergy were all laughing hysterically because they thought I was telling a joke. Like, why do you have to train people to invite people to church? That's ridiculous. Why don't they just do it? And it's kind of, well, you know, we're a bit nervous of it, actually, a lot of the time. And we're not very good with change necessarily, and we're not necessarily very good at accepting when something's a little bit different. So I remember one church, will also be nameless, I was preaching and my husband Tim had come along later because there were 2 services, and God bless him, he does a lot of things for me, but he doesn't like to sit through 3 services on a Sunday morning. He'll just come to the one. And so he arrived at the church a little bit late, and there were 2 ladies at the back, and they had bulletins, and they were chatting. And he said, oh, excuse me, but could I have a bulletin? And he said, oh, are you with someone? Because we haven't got many left. Are you with someone? Could you share? He said, well, I am with someone, but you know, I can't sit with them right now. And so, so trumped it off, sat down, and anyway, the rector gets up and says, we're delighted this morning to welcome Bishop Jane and her husband Tim. Tim, would you stand up so everybody could see you? So he stood up and he said, at the peace, these women ran. They ran over, and they said the worst thing they could possibly say. Can you guess what it was? If we'd known it was you. So it's the thing about how do you get to know new people? You always imagine they're called Jesus in the eyes of the Father. And then there are things that cannot come out of your mouth. There are things that just cannot come out of your mouth. It's a hard way to live, but it's a beautiful way to live. St. Augustine of Hippo said, if you aspire to do great things, begin with little ones. So for each of you, and for me, I include myself here, is there a goatee thing that you do, a little goatee thing, that you could just decide, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to stop doing it right now. Don't worry, there's going to be no sharing, it's okay. You don't have to admit to any goatiness here, it's okay. But is there something that's a bit goatee that you could decide that you were not going to do. And pick something small so that you stick with it. Don't pick something huge because it'll last 2 days. I remember asking people if they were prepared, could they do 5 minutes extra prayer every day? And everyone was, oh yes, and we had a bit of a Peter moment. Not just 5 minutes, give me, I'm taking now, and I said, no, just 5 minutes. And we practiced what 5 minutes extra prayer reflection is going to look like. And I got, the birthday cake candles? They take 5 minutes to burn down. So we sat with this candle, and it went down, and at the end, this man went, oh, he said, 5 minutes is a long time. That's a big ask, you know. Like, yep. But beginning with little things. Are there little things that you can do that will change, right? And then the most important thing, the thing I have learned more than anything else in the last, how old am I? I'm 58. In the last 58 years, the thing I have learned more than anything else. Yes. That the people around you teach you something about Christ, right? How can you get to understand what God is doing in the world outside your own life if you don't let other people show you? Let other people show you what Christ is doing and what he's about. When we listen, we might just find out that someone is desperately seeking to be reconciled with Christ, maybe reconciled with you, reconciled with someone else. And you hear about what God is calling them to do. But let the people around you teach something. And have a manifesto. That was the thing I started talking about, right? Have a piece of scripture that you live by and know what that's going to be, all right? So take time to think what that might be. So as a faith leader, and whether you are ordained or not ordained, you are a faith leader. You are called to be a leader in the faith. Jesus says, Luke 4 it's been known as the Nazareth Manifesto, right? But the idea that he would reach out to the oppressed, to let the oppressed go free. There's more than one way of translating that, but it literally means people who've been broken to bits. So what's your manifesto for your faith life? What are you about? Are you about healing? Are you about passionate prayer? Are you about taking people who've been broken to bits by life and helping them to be put back together again in the name of Christ? Do you have an active faith that says, who is captive around me? Or who have I, or what have I become blind to? What do I just not notice anymore? Who around me is broken? And then we walk alongside and we proclaim by our words and our actions that God is present. So you'll have your own things that you've been doing that. And Faith Communities in Edmonton have been doing that for a long time. We've done it through the interfaith housing initiatives with Capital Region Housing. We've done it through interfaith builds with Habitat for Humanity. We've done it through a Welcome Home program, which is how can you as a faith community welcome people who've come to live in low income, low cost, affordable housing in your area. How do you go out and welcome them? What does that look like? And to counteract some of those other things that the local community sometimes says. And then we've gone deeper just in the last month with an End Poverty Action Guide with steps that every congregation could take from a number of faith perspectives. It's not just, it's not an Anglican book, it's a multi-faith book of what different people are doing. So, for example, in there is an example of the Ishmaeli faith community, which is very small in Edmonton. So what they did, they simply found out how many of their members lived in poverty, and they decided that in 5 years they wouldn't, and they're working on it. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if your community decided, okay, which families here need some help? And remember, we're not just talking about money here. Which families need some help? And we as a community, we have all the skills we need to make a difference here. And so we're going to put our best skills together to work as family, because that's what we are. We're going to work with the people in our community to lift everybody up. Can you imagine if that happened in every church? What amazing things would happen there. But often we don't do it because we say, well, you know, people will be embarrassed, they don't want us to know, they wouldn't want our help, and it's singling people out, and the church isn't a social work department, and. And sometimes all those things are excuses. Excuses not to do the ministry that Jesus would do if he were here. And that's the question we don't like to ask ourselves. Okay. Well, the way we've just treated this thing, the way we're aware of this situation but we say nothing about it, is that actually what the gospel tells us to do? And then to remember when we speak to people about what we say. There's a wonderful guy, Vincent Donovan, who wrote a book called Christianity Rediscovered. And I said about having a mantra. Well, it's a bit of a mantra for me. Do not call people back to where they were, because they were probably never there. Not in this day and age. Do not call people to where you are, as beautiful as it may seem to you, but travel with them to a place neither of you have been before. The church of next week, the church of next year, the church of next century. I have no idea what it will look like. All I know is that it will be beautiful. All I know is that God will be there. And all I know is there will be a whole bunch of people who are trying to live out their spiritual DNA and to be the sheepiest people that they can possibly be. And in doing that and working together, we're actually going to make disciples, make followers of Jesus. Because the making and nurturing of disciples is an essential call and ministry of every single one of us. It's grounded in relationships one to another and to Christ. People come to faith because someone invited them and it came out of a relationship for 99.9% of people. How did you end up coming to know Jesus? Were you sitting one day and you suddenly had a brainwave which said, I must get to know Jesus? Or was it a person? Was it a person by their prayers, by their example, by their invitation? How did that happen? One of the things I think to give thanks for on a day like today, and as at the convocation later on, is to give thanks that for all those invisible clouds of witnesses that we usually just talk about on All Saints Day, right? Those clouds of witnesses who've been on the sidelines in our life, whether in reality here and now or in the heavenly host, who are standing on the sidelines, waving their pom-poms and saying, you can do it, go on, go on, go on. That all of those people who made us disciples of Christ, that we give thanks for. And for the people who are convocate tonight, that we give thanks for the people who've encouraged them on. And that we live it out. And above all, we remember that it is God who transforms people. It is God who transforms people. So we have an intelligent faith about it. We try and think outside the box. And we try and be the church. Be the church by remembering that the distinction between the sheep and goats is between those who've got it and those who haven't quite got it yet, because no one's taught them. So thank you very much for letting me talk to you about some of this stuff this morning. I hope that some of it has resonated with you, and if it didn't and you just want to think about, my goodness, Ed Lewis has had a profound effect in the church across the country, then that's great. But give thanks for whoever brought you to Christ today. Take a moment and give thanks for them. And may your sheepy DNA grow stronger in you every single day as you try and find out what God is doing in your community and those opportunities he's giving you, even if they're scary, even if your voice shakes, that you can't help yourself but take up. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bishop Jane. We're going to take a break now for some coffee, and It's 20 minutes to 11. We'll come back at 11, and then we'll have some reflection. You might have some questions on the talk, and we can deal with that then. So, time for relaxation for a few moments.
Thank you.